Imagine the Imperium, where great houses vie for power and the Spacing Guild holds the threads of commerce between the stars. There moves an ancient order whose influence flows like water through sand, felt everywhere yet seen by few. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood has walked among the powerful for millennia, their black robes marking them as advisors, truth-sayers, servants of the great and mighty. Yet beneath this surface of service lies a design so ambitious, so breathtakingly audacious, that even those who created it could scarce imagine where it would lead. This is the chronicle of their greatest triumph and most terrible failure. How the Sisterhood sought to manufacture a god and lost control of their creation. To understand the Bene Gesserit is to perceive the Imperium as they do, not as a collection of noble houses and trading companies, but as a vast genetic reservoir, a breeding ground for human potential carefully tended across the millennia. Where others see the Shome Company's stranglehold on commerce or the Guild's monopoly on space travel, the Sisterhood perceives bloodlines converging and diverging like rivers in an ancient delta, each carrying within it the accumulated heritage of humanity itself. The uninitiated know them as witches, and this reputation serves their purposes well. When a Bene Gesserit sister stands beside a duke or baron as truthsayer, few suspect that her true mission extends far beyond detecting lies in a throne room. The ability to perceive truth is but one facet of their training, a convenient skill that grants them access to the halls of power where the real work unfolds. The careful notation of genetic markers, the subtle encouragement of certain marriages, the prevention of others. For beneath their cowled hoods and behind their respectful demeanor, the Bene Gesserit pursue an aim that would stagger the imagination of any great house, the controlled evolution of humanity itself. They are gardeners of the human genome, and they have been cultivating their garden for thousands of years, awaiting the flowering of one perfect bloom. To forge a Bene Gesserit sister requires a transformation more profound than any military training, more exacting than the conditioning of a mentat from childhood. The acolytes learn the ways of prana bindu, the total control of nerve and muscle that allows a sister to govern every aspect of her physical being. Through endless hours of practice, they master minutiae that escape ordinary humans. The ability to control each muscle fiber independently, to alter their body chemistry at will, to choose the very moment of conception, and more crucially, the gender of their offspring. Yet physical mastery represents merely the foundation. The voice, that compelling modulation of tone that can command obedience from the unwary, demands not just control of one's own vocal cords, but an almost preternatural ability to read the psychological patterns of others, to find the exact harmonic that will resonate with a listener's deepest conditioning. A sister learns to perceive the telltale signs that betray inner thoughts, the dilation of pupils, the unconscious tensing of specific muscles, the variations in breathing that accompany deception or fear or desire. For those who survive the years of training and prove themselves worthy, there awaits the ultimate transformation, the spice agony. In this ritual that has destroyed countless aspirants, a sister imbibes the concentrated essence of melange, the geriatric spice, in such quantities that it becomes a poison within her body. She must then consciously transform this poison at the molecular level, demonstrating absolute mastery over her own biochemistry. Those who fail die in convulsions. Those who succeed emerge as Reverend Mothers, bearing within their consciousness not merely their own memories, but the accumulated experiences of their female predecessors stretching back through uncounted generations. This other memory transforms a Reverend Mother into a living repository of the sisterhood's history. Every triumph and failure, every lesson learned through millennia of careful manipulation resides within her awareness. When she speaks with the wisdom of ages. When she plans with the experience of countless lifetimes. Consider then what manner of being emerges from such training. A woman who can control her body absolutely, who can command with her voice, who can detect the slightest deception, who carries within her the memories of her predecessors. These are the instruments the Bene Gesserit have shaped to pursue their great design. These are the hands that have been shaping humanity's destiny from the shadows for longer than most civilizations have existed. The Bene Gesserit breeding program represents an undertaking of such scope that individual sisters might live and die seeing only the smallest fragment of its pattern. Across 90 generations, the sisterhood has tracked genetic markers through the great houses, recording each birth, each death, each union with meticulous care. Their breeding index, that most secret of documents, charts the flow of genes through noble bloodlines like a navigator, charts safe passage through fold space. What they seek defies simple explanation, for the concept itself pushes at the boundaries of human understanding. The Kwisatz Haderach, the shortening of the way, the one who can be many places at once in the sisterhood's vision, this figure would possess mental powers that transcend the limitations binding ordinary humans. Where a Reverend Mother looks back through feminine memories alone, the Kwisatz Haderach would pierce the veil in both directions, accessing the complete repository of human genetic experience. More than memory, he would possess prescient sight of such clarity and range that space and time would become fluid concepts, malleable to his perception. The breeding program focused with particular intensity upon two bloodlines, House Atreides and House Harkonnen. For generations uncounted, the sisterhood had tracked specific genetic markers through both houses, waiting for the precise moment when their union might produce the desired result. The plan, refined through centuries of careful calculation, called for an Atreides daughter to be wed to Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, nephew of the Baron Vladimir. Their offspring, according to all projections, would carry the highest probability of manifesting as the Kwisatz Haderach. Every detail had been arranged with exquisite care. The Lady Jessica, herself the product of careful breeding, daughter to Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, though this fact remained hidden from all but the highest circles of the sisterhood, had been placed with Duke Leto Atreides as concubine. Her orders were explicit: bear a daughter to the Duke, ensure her proper training, prepare her for union with the Harkonnen heir. Through this carefully orchestrated mating, the sisterhood would at last achieve their goal. A super being under their complete control, trained in their ways, bound by gratitude and conditioning to serve their purposes. Yet even the most careful plans founder upon the rock of human emotion. The sisterhood, for all their wisdom, had made one critical miscalculation. They had forgotten that even a Bene Gesserit remains human. Long before the breeding program could reach fruition, the sisterhood had been preparing the ground in another fashion entirely. The missionaria protectiva, that most subtle arm of the Bene Gesserit, had for centuries wandered the forgotten corners of the Imperium, seeding myths and prophecies among the populations deemed primitive by the great houses. This was protection of the most cunning sort, creating legends that any Bene Gesserit could later exploit should she find herself in danger among these peoples. The methodology followed patterns refined over millennia. Into the religious frameworks of isolated populations, the missionaria protectiva would weave specific elements. Prophecies of a Messiah figure, often described as coming from off-world, frequently accompanied by an older woman of wisdom and power. The variations were countless, adapted to local beliefs and customs, but the core remained constant. Prepare these populations to accept and protect any Bene Gesserit who might later arrive and key into these implanted myths. On Arrakis, that desert planet which would prove so crucial to their plans, the missionaria protectiva had worked with particular thoroughness among the Fremen, those fierce dwellers of the deep desert. They found a culture already rich in messianic tradition. Into this fertile ground, they planted the legend of the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world. The prophecies spoke of one who would come with the ability to see where others could not, who would lead them to paradise. Crucially, the legends specified that this figure would be born of a Bene Gesserit witch. The Sisterhood viewed these planted myths as nothing more than insurance, protective coloration for any sister who might find herself stranded among the freemen. They could not foresee that their manufactured prophecies would one day fuel a jihad that would shake the very foundations of the Imperium. They could not imagine that their carefully crafted lies would become truth in ways that would horrify them. For the missionaria protectiva had succeeded too well. In their eagerness to create protective myths, they had failed to consider what might happen should a genuine prophetic figure arise, one who could exploit these legends, not for temporary safety, but for universe-spanning power. They had created a weapon and left it lying in the desert, waiting for the right hand to wield it. In the annals of the Sisterhood, few moments carry such weight as the night Jessica of the Atreides looked upon her duke and made a choice that would reshape the universe she had come to him as instructed, played her role as concubine with perfect grace, used every art of the Bene Gesserit to ensure his affection while maintaining the proper emotional distance her mission required. The Sisterhood had chosen well in sending her to Leto. Their genetic profiles matched perfectly for the breeding program's purposes. Yet somewhere in the careful dance of seduction and service, something unexpected occurred. Jessica found herself experiencing an emotion her teachers had warned against, a feeling that threatened the very foundations of her training. She fell in love with her duke, not the calculated affection that might serve the Sisterhood's purposes, but genuine, overwhelming love that filled her awareness and made all other considerations seem suddenly small. The Duke, for his part, yearned for a son. House Atreides needed an heir, and though he could not make Jessica his wife, political necessities bound him to remain unmarried, available for alliance. He spoke often of his desire for a boy to carry on the Atreides name. Jessica heard these wishes and found herself torn between duty and desire, between the commands of her sisterhood and the needs of her beloved. In that choice lay the pivot upon which history would turn. Jessica could feel within her womb the moment of conception, could have shaped that nascent life into the daughter the sisterhood required. The techniques were second nature to her, the biological control absolute. Yet in that crucial instant, love conquered duty. She chose to give her duke the son he desired. When Paul Atreides drew his first breath, the Bene Gesserit breeding program shattered like crystal dropped upon stone. 90 generations of careful planning destroyed by one woman's choice to place love above obedience. The daughter who should have wed Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen would never exist. The controlled mating that should have produced the Kwisatz Haderach under Sisterhood guidance had been circumvented. Yet Jessica's defiance had achieved something the Sisterhood had not anticipated. In bearing a son instead of a daughter, she had inadvertently accelerated their timeline. The child she carried bore all the genetic markers the Sisterhood had been combining. The Atreides line stretching back through millennia, the hidden Harkonnen genetics from Jessica herself. Paul Atreides emerged as an unexpected possibility, a potential Kwisatz Haderach born a generation too soon, outside the Sisterhood's carefully constructed controls. The reverberations of this choice would echo through time. Love, that most human of emotions, had introduced chaos into the Bene Gesserit's ordered plans they had forgotten in their centuries of manipulation. That even the most perfectly trained sister remained capable of the one act they could not predict or prevent, the act of genuine love. From his earliest years, Paul Atreides displayed abilities that should have alarmed the Sisterhood far more than they did. The boy experienced prescient dreams of disturbing accuracy, seeing faces and places before encountering them in the flesh. His mother, training him in the Bene Gesserit ways despite her betrayal of their breeding program, recognized these signs, yet dared not report their full extent to her superiors. The test came when Paul was 15, as the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam arrived to determine if Jessica's son might somehow serve the Sisterhood's purposes despite the disruption he represented. The Gom Jabbar, that test of human awareness, had destroyed many who attempted it. The subject must place their hand within a box that creates the sensation of burning agony while a poisoned needle hovers at their throat. Animal instinct demands withdrawal. Human awareness overrides instinct, enduring the pain to eliminate the threat of the tester. Paul's performance exceeded all expectations. Where others had endured moments or minutes, he remained steadfast far longer, his awareness so acute that he could perceive the very nature of the test while experiencing it. The Reverend Mother, despite witnessing this unprecedented performance, failed to grasp its full significance. When House Atreides fell to Harkonnen treachery on Arrakis, Paul and his pregnant mother fled into the desert, directly into the myths the missionaria protectiva had so carefully planted the Fremen. Seeing in Paul the marks of their prophesied Lisan al-Gaib, offered shelter and protection. Yet Paul was no mere Bene Gesserit adept exploiting planted legends for survival. His prescient awareness had begun to unfold in full, showing him the terrible purpose that awaited. In the desert, Paul found the catalyst that would complete his transformation. The spice melange, omnipresent in the sands of Arrakis, saturated everything: food, water, air itself. Where the Sisterhood had always feared the spice trance, understanding its potential to unlock prescient vision while recognizing the terrible price of addiction, Paul embraced it. His mind, already prepared by genetics and training, expanded beyond all boundaries the Bene Gesserit had imagined possible. The warrior religion Paul saw in his visions horrified him, even as he recognized its inevitability. He perceived the jihad that would spread across the universe in his name. billions dying beneath the banner of Muad'Dib. He saw himself becoming the very thing the sisterhood had sought to create, and something far more terrible. For where they had envisioned a tool under their control, Paul emerged as a force unto himself, owing allegiance to no one, driven by visions of futures only he could perceive. The Kwisatz Haderach had indeed arrived, but in a form the Bene Gesserit had never anticipated. Paul could be many places at once, his consciousness expanding through prescient vision to perceive multiple futures simultaneously. He could look where no Reverend Mother dared, into the genetic memories of both male and female ancestors. Yet this power came wedded to understanding of its consequences, the trap of prescience that would lock him into paths of terrible necessity. Most crucially, Paul understood what he was in a way the sisterhood could not. "I'm something unexpected," he had told his mother, and in that simple statement lay the seed of the Bene Gesserit's downfall. They had sought to create a Superman under their control, but they had instead unleashed a force that would reshape the universe according to its own terrible vision. If Paul represented an unexpected acceleration of the Bene Gesserit program, his sister Alia embodied its most nightmarish potential. Conceived before Jessica's flight into the desert, Alia experienced something no child should endure: full awakening to consciousness while still in the womb. When Jessica underwent the spice agony to become a reverend mother among the freemen, the transformation touched not only her, but the unborn child within. In that terrible moment of chemical transformation, as Jessica's awareness exploded to encompass the memories of her female predecessors, Alia too received this burden. But where Jessica possessed a formed personality capable of integrating such memories, Alia awakened to self-awareness already drowning in the experiences of countless lives. She became what the Bene Gesserit most feared: preborn, possessed of adult consciousness and ancient memories while still unformed. The sisterhood had a word for such beings: abomination. Their teachings warned in the strongest terms against allowing such consciousness to develop, for they understood the terrible danger it represented. A child's mind, lacking the stable core of identity that comes from lived experience, could not properly defend against the competing personalities within ancestral memory. The preborn stood vulnerable to possession by any of the countless identities they carried within. Alia grew to physical maturity, carrying this impossible burden, walking through childhood with the accumulated wisdom and cynicism of millennia. She spoke with adult authority from her earliest years, her blue within blue eyes holding depths of experience that unsettled even those who loved her. The Fremen called her Saint Alia of the Knife, venerating her as a holy figure even as they feared what they saw within her. As she matured, the strain of maintaining her identity against the clamoring multitude within grew ever greater. The spice, inescapable on Arrakis, offered temporary relief through the trance state, but each use weakened her barriers further. She found herself turning more and more to these inner voices for guidance, particularly as the responsibilities of power pressed upon her following Paul's disappearance into the desert. The possession, when it finally came, arrived through the one voice she had fought hardest to suppress, that of her maternal grandfather, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. His personality, vicious and cunning, found purchase in moments of Alia's weakness and began to assert ever greater control. The abomination, the Bene Gesserit, had warned against manifested in full as Alia became a battleground between her own fading identity and the monstrous presence of the Baron. Here then was another failure of the breeding program, perhaps even more terrible than their loss of control over Paul. In seeking to create beings of expanded consciousness, they had not fully considered the implications of their success. Alia demonstrated that the very abilities they sought to breed could become a curse beyond imagining, that the expansion of human potential carried with it dangers that could destroy not just individuals, but the very fabric of civilization. As if to compound their failures, the universe presented the Bene Gesserit with a double iteration of their nightmare in the forms of Leto II and Ganima, born to Paul's Fremen concubine Chani, herself saturated with spice throughout pregnancy. The twins emerged as preborn, carrying within them from birth the full ancestral memories of both the Atreides and Harkonnen lines. Yet where Alia had awakened to consciousness alone and undefended, the twins possessed each other. From their first moments of awareness, they could turn to one another for stability, creating a reciprocal relationship that helped them maintain their identities against the pressure of ancestral memory. They developed private languages, shared experiences that belonged to them alone, and built defensive strategies against possession through mutual support. The sisterhood, observing from a distance, saw in these children both opportunity and threat. Here were beings who carried the precious genetic markers they had sought for so long, the culmination of their breeding program in duplicate. Yet they were also preborn, abominations by the sisterhood's own definition, and they showed disturbing signs of independence from any outside control. More troubling still, the twins displayed an understanding of the Bene Gesserit that surpassed even experienced Reverend Mothers. They could access not just the memories, but the experiences of Jessica, of Alia, of countless sisters stretching back through time. When the Lady Jessica returned to Arrakis, ostensibly to visit her grandchildren, but truly to assess them for the sisterhood, she found herself facing children who knew her with an intimacy that shook her to her core. "We know your sisterhood's plans," Leto told her with the calm certainty of one stating simple fact. They understood the breeding program, the intended purpose of the Kwisatz Haderach, even the hidden possibility that Jessica had come to secure them for the Bene Gesserit. Every secret, every manipulation, every careful plan lay bare before their prescient sight and ancestral knowledge. Most disturbing of all, the twins had begun to perceive paths beyond anything the sisterhood had envisioned. Where Paul had seen the trap of prescience and sought to escape it through blindness and exile, Leto began to speak of a golden path, a vision that extended far beyond the sisterhood's goals of controlled human evolution. His sight reached across millennia, perceiving necessities that dwarfed the Bene Gesserit program in both scope and consequence. In Leto, Tu and Ganima, the sisterhood faced the ultimate result of their centuries of manipulation. Beings who had transcended their design so completely that they now stood in judgment over their creators. The tools had not merely escaped control, they had become forces capable of reshaping the very nature of human destiny according to their own vision. In the wake of Paul's jihad, as billions died beneath the banner of religious war, the Bene Gesserit found themselves confronting the full magnitude of their failure. The Kwisatz Haderach they had sought to create had indeed come into being, but as a force of destruction rather than the control tool they had envisioned. Worse, His very existence had shattered the delicate political balance they had spent millennia maintaining. The irony cut deep. Every technique they had developed, every myth they had planted, every genetic marker they had carefully preserved, had contributed to creating the instrument of their own marginalization. Paul had used Bene Gesserit training to resist Bene Gesserit control. He had exploited the missionaria protectiva's planted prophecies to build a power base beyond their reach. His prescient vision allowed him to anticipate and counter their every move. Yet the sisterhood endured, as they had endured for millennia before. They adapted their plans, seeking new avenues of influence in the transformed universe Paul had created. Some among them counseled patience, arguing that even this disaster might serve their longer purposes, had they not sought to guide human evolution. Perhaps this chaos was a necessary step in that evolution, though not one they had foreseen. Others within the sisterhood pursued more immediate goals, attempting to secure genetic material from the Atreides line to salvage something from the wreckage of their breeding program. The twins represented both the culmination of their work and its ultimate failure, beings of impossible capability who stood forever beyond their control. Some sisters whispered of trying again, of beginning anew with other bloodlines, but the universe had changed too fundamentally. The old ways of patient manipulation across centuries seemed quaint in a universe where prescient beings could perceive and counter plans before they were even made. The Reverend Mothers found themselves in the position of gardeners whose carefully cultivated plant had grown beyond all bounds, transforming the very garden itself. They had sought to create a being of expanded consciousness who would serve their purposes. But consciousness, once expanded, seeks its own purposes. In their hubris, they had forgotten that evolution, once begun, follows its own paths rather than those its initiators might prefer. As the sisterhood retreated to reconsider their methods and goals, they carried with them the hard-won knowledge of their failure. They had succeeded in creating superior humans, and in doing so, had created beings superior to their creator's ability to control or even fully comprehend the manufactured Messiah, had transcended his manufacturers. In the great silence of the desert night, when the moons of Arrakis cast their ancient light across the dunes, one might contemplate the terrible price of the Bene Gesserit's ambition. They had sought to guide human destiny with the patient hand of the gardener, pruning here, nurturing there, always with the vision of that perfect flowering they alone could see. Yet destiny, like the desert wind, follows patterns larger than any human design. Consider the audacity of their undertaking, to breed a god, to manufacture transcendence through genetic manipulation and psychological conditioning. For 90 generations, they had moved bloodlines like pieces on a board, sacrificing individuals to the perceived needs of the species. They had created myths to protect themselves, never dreaming those myths might take on life beyond their control. They had pursued the expansion of human consciousness, never fully grasping that expanded consciousness might expand beyond their philosophy. The Kwisatz Haderach did come, as they had foreseen. He could indeed be many places at once, could see where others could not, could access the memories they had so carefully preserved and combined, but he was not their creature. He was his own being, driven by visions they could not share, shaped by experiences they had not planned. In Paul, in Alia, in the twins, the Bene Gesserit faced the eternal truth that creation, once achieved, belongs not to the Creator, but to itself. Perhaps this was always inevitable. Perhaps any attempt to control the evolution of consciousness must fail, for consciousness, by its very nature, seeks freedom. The Bene Gesserit had played with forces beyond their comprehension, had sought to channel the deepest currents of human potential into paths of their choosing. They discovered, to their cost, that such currents, once released, carve their own channels. Yet from their failure arose something greater than their vision, beings capable of perceiving humanity's path across millennia, of making choices that would preserve the species against threats the Sisterhood could not even imagine. The golden path that Leto II would follow stretched far beyond the Bene Gesserit's goals, encompassed sacrifices and transformations that would make their breeding program seem a child's game. In seeking to manufacture a Messiah, the Sisterhood had unleashed forces that would reshape not merely political structures, but the very nature of human existence. They had sought control and achieved transformation. They had pursued limited goals and unleashed unlimited possibilities. Their greatest failure was perhaps their greatest, if unintended, gift to humanity. As the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, as the spice continues its work of transformation in human consciousness, as the descendants of their breeding program work out destinies beyond any Reverend Mother's prescient vision, the lesson remains. Those who would shape the future must beware, for the future has a way of shaping itself. The manufactured Messiah serves no manufacturer. The expanded consciousness recognizes no limits, save those it accepts for itself. And in the end, perhaps that was always the true purpose hiding within the Bene Gesserit's great design. Not to create a tool for their use, but to birth a being capable of transcending the very need for such tools, such controls, such limitations. In their failure lay humanity's liberation. In their broken plans lay the seed of possibilities they could never have imagined. The desert wind carries these truths across the dunes, whispering them to any who have ears to hear. Seek not to control what you create, for creation has its own purposes. Plant your myths carefully, for they may grow into truths you never intended. And above all, remember that love, simple human love, remains more powerful than any breeding program, any genetic design, any plan that spans millennia. For it was love that broke the Bene Gesserit's plan, and from that breaking came the transformation of the universe itself. Thus ends this chronicle of manufactured gods and transcendent failures, of controls that could not hold, and freedoms that could not be denied. Let those who would play with human destiny take heed, for the universe has its own plans, and they are always larger than ours. Sleep now, and in sleeping, dream of possibilities beyond any sisterhood's vision.